Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Welcome, Rush Nation, to the Daily Fantasy Sports Show. Mark, the start of a new era. FanTeam season-long NFL contest, Week 1 team reveals. I am so excited. I know you are as well. How are we doing, Mark? It's been a week since we last spoke. I feel like it's been weeks, but it's only been a week.
It's been an amazing week, hasn't it? All of a sudden, Week 1 is upon us.
Yeah.
Which just seems to have really sort of caught up with me, and we have a lot of content to go through.
Yes, we do. It's getting to that point now where it's hours rather than days. That is where the countdown is at now. I cannot wait.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's important to just point out first of all, Mark, I think for new listeners to the show, and we did cover this off in the strategy pod that we covered for the FanTeam season-long contest last week. But for listeners that maybe missed that show or are new to the show, basically what we will be covering week on week is our team reveals, essentially, and what we decide to do with our season-long teams in terms of the transfers and the strategy behind that. We've decided to change our tact a little bit, Mark, this year. Last season, we were very DraftKings focused, very, Sunday main slate. There wasn't really, it's the kind of content that was out there, shall we say. And we decided that this season we were going to change it up a little bit. We decided to partner with FanTeam, and we will be bringing you weekly live shows, hopefully, weekly podcasts and weekly articles about the season-long contest, which is a really exciting contest that has been launched. For anyone who hasn't seen it yet, get yourselves over to FanTeam, filter to, I think it comes up as football, Mark, because it is referred to as football, obviously, in the States, not soccer. The two are different, but yeah, if you filter down to football, you will find the contest. It's about £8.40 to enter. Get your team in. The deadline is Thursday. Absolutely. You've got to get your team in soon. You will be able to enter after this week. If it's the same as other season-long contests that FanTeam run, Mark, there will be an average score of the people that have entered. And if you decide to enter on week 2, you'll more than likely enter with that average score of the field. Sometimes that's actually a good time to enter because you get a bit of a look for, some of the depth charts and some of the players that maybe weren't in your plans, maybe come up in your plans from week 2 onwards. So it's always a good time to reassess at that stage. If you've not entered, get yourself in on week 2, but definitely get your lineup in before Thursday. That lineup, that deadline is fast approaching, Mark, isn't it? So, you've got to get your team in. Hopefully this will help you.
It is fast approaching. Every week the lock is going to be before the Thursday night game. So something to bear in mind. On a normal week, you will at best have the Wednesday injury reports. But as anybody's played NFL, any sort of DFS NFL contest before, injuries don't change enormously through the week. You usually know pretty early in the week who's going to play. It's quite where I can think of one time it happened last year where we got surprised at Zeke Elliott being out, but other than that, it just doesn't really happen. So Thursday night lock it is before the Thursday night game. And then we're hopefully going to help you through the season. We've had a lot of questions from people before this, a lot of questions on the FanTeam Discord from people who are, say, experienced at FPL, but want to know about the NFL. One thing which I hope you agree with me with, Nick, is we're not really entirely sure at the moment what's going to be the optimal strategy. We don't even know what would be a good score on a week-by-week basis. I'm thinking it will be about, we get 135 million, so I'm thinking 100 sort of point per million would be quite a good score. I don't know though. It's hard to tell because the pricing basically dictates how many points you're going to get each week. because of who you can play. It's hard to tell at the moment. So that's one of the things we're going to learn together on this journey with you all. And but hopefully, if you listened to the last pod, you heard me and Nick talking about lots of different types of strategies with roster construction, talking them through. I think for anybody, just sort of the quick summary of that was there is no bad roster if you're spending your money. I don't think there's such thing as a bad lineup. Neither of us particularly like the 2 tight end construction, but that was about it. But as long as you're spending your money, I don't think there's such a thing as a bad starting lineup.
Yeah. I completely agree, Mark, and you know from us speaking today that I've changed my lineup about 4 times today, and each time it's not been a bad lineup, but there's been differences and reasons why those lineups were different, but no bad reasons as to why those lineups still couldn't score equally or one score as good as another. So you're completely right in what you're saying there. No such thing as a bad lineup. And one thing we know about the NFL is, yes, it can be variable, but a lot of the time, your players that you expect to perform do perform. You know, we've got so much statistical history for that. And the players that you're expecting to perform at a position, there's a chance that even if they're not maybe inside the top 3, the top 5, if you're expecting them to be, they'll be there and thereabouts bearing injury. If you haven't had a chance to actually listen back to our strategy podcast and you can squeeze it in before the deadline along with this one, I would definitely urge anyone to go back and listen to that. Like you said, Mark, this is new to us as well. One thing I will say is for anyone who is playing this as a bit of a convert from the Euro competition over the summer, or anyone who has started playing the Fantasy Premier League competition, you might have a keen interest in the NFL and you've decided to jump on this as well, that's something that seems to be happening in the community, Mark, like you said, with Discord chatting on Twitter. If this is new to you, just remember it's new to us as well. One thing I will say though is we have got a lot of experience in the NFL fantasy side of things. We've got a lot of experience in the DFS side of things for this sport. So hopefully what we'll be bringing you each week will resonate and you'll be along the same kind of lines, but it's going to be a big learning curve for us as well, because we haven't played this kind of season-long contest before. We haven't had this kind of planning, and it does still work a little bit differently to normal fantasy, even though it still appears a little bit like normal fantasy in how you construct your roster. There is definitely differences there, Mark, and I think you'd agree with that.
Oh yeah, 100%. As I said earlier, everything is dictated by price, really, I think. And obviously these are pretty unique prices. The prices are very, very tight. It's I would say pretty much impossible to feel comfortable with every position. I don't know if you agree with that, but I find it doesn't matter how I construct lineups, I'm always taking 1 or 2 gambles, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's and because of that, I think it's going to make it really interesting. I think what will happen is after a few weeks, some obvious value will become apparent, and then they'll become highly rostered players, and then it'll kind of end up being how you pick the other 7 week to week, how you plan for your bye weeks, etc., etc. And you also have a wild card you can use at some point, but I think most people are planning to use that towards the end of the season because of injuries.
Yeah, I think the transfers will definitely come in handy there with the 2 transfers you get each week and the one that you can carry forward if you don't use both of those transfers. So you can accumulate a maximum of 3 transfers to use within a week. Anything beyond that, there will be a penalty to take a player out. As we know from things like Fantasy Premier League, it works exactly the same. So it is essentially a blend of the 2 kind of contests, NFL Fantasy and Fantasy Premier League. So it will feel quite familiar with a lot of people. I think, touching on the wildcard, Mark, I suspect I'm hoping I'll be using mine towards the end of the season, or certainly after the bye weeks are out of the way. But if need be, if the opportunity presented itself, and it was right to use it early on, I'm certainly not discounting that as well. That option's there on the table. And wildcard, when you feel you need to make enough adjustments within your team to either keep up with the pack, overtake the pack, or if you've just got injury issues, which we know can crop up in the NFL, sometimes those two transfers might not be enough to satisfy that need within your team. So there's no right or wrong time to wildcard in this, but that in itself, I think, will be a learning curve for us because we've never had to use something like that when we've played NFL fantasy or daily fantasy sports.
Yeah, I think traditionally zigging when everybody else zags is a pretty good way to play DFS, but with this sort of season-long style of contest, I don't think you have to zig so much, but you use the wild card could be the way to do that. If everybody else is waiting towards the end of the season and they're making compromises because they're doing that, then, jump ahead of them all.
Yeah.
Just do your wild card in the middle of the buys and stuff. Or if something becomes apparent, like a particular team, especially a team which has got lower rostered players on it, has what looks like a really good stretch of games, a little bit like we saw with David Montgomery last year in Chicago and stuff towards the end. But if you see something like that in the middle of the season, then that could also be a reason to use the wild card. And I think it might sort of allow you to catch up the field or go past them or whatever a little bit. So, but who knows? We guess it's all speculation right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I would say is don't panic with this. If you do fall behind in week one, there's a chance that in week two you might catch back up again because it may just be that one or two of your players haven't performed how you expected. So I would say, even though we do have 17 weeks this season, Mark, 17 weeks of football, just be patient with
18, I think.
18?
Yeah, 18.
I'm doing a short week of football there.
Yeah.
18 weeks. So be patient. The results don't always come in week one. I mentioned this on the strategy podcast, but trust your process, trust why you've chosen those players and remember why they're in there. And, if you've got someone like a Calvin Ridley who maybe doesn't go off in week one, he could be catching 2 touchdowns in week two, and you could quickly claw that gap back on the pack that you're chasing. So be patient with this and obviously be adaptable as well. Learn as you go along, as we will. One of the things you mentioned, Mark, twin tight end is out for us both. I think that that's no secret for anyone that listened to the pod that we did last week. Is there anything, before we do get into the lineup shortly, is there anything that you have surprised yourself with, or anything where you've changed your approach from when we spoke last tactically?
I think actually you might have changed my approach a bit, and we'll see that with the lineup that you're going to show us later, because almost every lineup I created, I would end up with like five sort of premium players, 1 middle one and 2 gamble players, as it were, and just kind of hoping that some obvious value would manifest itself pretty early doors. But having looked at your lineup, which we're going to do at the end, I think there's only really 1 gamble player in your lineup, and I think that's making me think I need to maybe reevaluate. So this lineup we're doing today, I'm going to keep this lineup for week one, injuries permitting, obviously. But I've got other lineups in the contest, and I might be stealing yours, Nick. I don't know.
You horrible, horrible man.
and then I'll basically keep it the same until week 18, and then I'll just make one change to yours, and I'll...
If it was anything like tiers last season, Mark, there'll be no beating going on. Only me.
Old news. Everyone's forgotten about that. Why do you think we're not doing tiers this year?
Yeah, the whole reason we've moved away from the DraftKings talk was Mark just couldn't stomach it any longer. He was almost quitting the pod. I had to talk him out of it.
Didn't take long.
No, it didn't. Before we do move on to the week one team reveals, support for the 5 Yard Rush Daily Fantasy Sports Show is brought to you by Manscaped, who are the best in men's below the waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped has recently launched their 4th generation trimmer, Mark, the Lawnmower 4, all across Europe. It is fantastic. I've used it myself. Anything that you feel I know that you've got one as well, Mark. Anything that you feel is great about the Lawnmower 4?
I can categorically say it is the greatest below-the-waist mower, trimmer, whatever you want to call it, I've ever owned.
I told you, Mark, last week. It's my lawnmower doesn't do as good a job as the Lawnmower 4 does. My actual grass lawnmower does not do the job that the Lawnmower 4 does.
Maybe you should use it then. It'll take a while.
I think there's some health and safety risk there, to be fair, Mark.
You could do it in the dark as well, because it's got like 4,000K lights.
Yeah, with the light, different trim settings as well. No, in all seriousness, Mark, it is an area where you should definitely not be neglecting, and I think far too many people do. So you should absolutely join the 2 million men worldwide that trust Manscaped. We do have an exclusive offer for you. We do have 20% off and free worldwide shipping. You just need to go to manscaped.com and use the code 5yard. There's some nice little package deals on there as well, Mark. I know that you're sporting the t-shirt tonight, but they've got some really comfortable underwear on there as well as part of the package. So definitely check out manscaped.com. The code is 5yard for 20% off and free worldwide shipping. Thanks very much to Manscaped for supporting the pod, as always. Mark, the time has come.
Yeah.
The team reveals. So, without further ado, Mark, let's get that team up.
Okay, here we go. So, this is my team. I think I'm going to start, because we so love talking about this, let's start at tight end. We start at tight end.
For anyone who wants to drop off the tight end conversation, you can come back in about 20 minutes. We should be done with it then.
Well, this will be the first of our tight end conversations, don't forget. Okay, so I've got Tyler Conklin of Minnesota in there, 9.5 million, which is a fantastic price. Now, this isn't just about Irv Smith going down. Last season, I heard this stat on another pod, so I just had to go and check it. It was accurate, but it is accurate. So last season, in the last 4 games for Minnesota, both Conklin and Irv Smith played. And despite Irv Smith being there, Conklin still had over 25 targets, and he actually outscored Irv Smith 2 out of the 4 weeks, fantasy-wise as well. So I think there's a bit of a connection there. I think it's a great pivot. If you're playing, regular weekly DFS, I think it's a fantastic pivot play off of Thielen or Jefferson, because you can't really stack those anyway. So because they're too expensive in regular DFS for this week. So Conklin for me is a great play, and at 9.5, he allows you to pay up in other positions. I think it doesn't matter how I looked at lineups. If I'm not playing Kelsey at tight end, I just don't like my lineups, and even with Kelsey in there, I don't particularly like them either, because I prefer that money to be spent at receiver or running back. So this is where I am. Dan Arnold got a look in as well. He's like 10.5, I think. Top of the Carolina Panthers depth chart at the moment. Had some nice games, a few nice games for Arizona last year. So yeah, but I've gone with Conklin in this case.
That's it. I know that you mentioned it to me earlier, and I just hadn't considered him at all, but I think it's a perfect price point, really, if it is a position where you are not targeting a Kelsey Kittle or Darren Waller. I think it is the kind of price point that I would probably target someone at, because I think essentially if you're not bringing in one of the top 3 guys, maybe Mark Andrews you could add to that list as well, if you feel that there is value there. And I suppose some would argue TJ Hawkinson is due his breakout season finally, though I know that you think otherwise, Mark, which is why you're shaking your head.
Public service announcement: don't pick TJ Hawkinson. It's just a world of disappointment.
I know that you're very bitter on TJ Hawkinson, Mark, but yeah, I think if you're not going with one of the top 3 or 4 guys, I think it's a good position to punt, because it's so varied. And when you actually look at, we looked last week at who was tight end 8 last season, and Rob Gronkowski was tight end 8 with 45 receptions, which is half what a top receiver, even like a top wide receiver 2 is likely to get you throughout the season. So I think if you're not going with one of the top guys, someone like Conklin at 9.5, it's a good punt because it has a potentially high ceiling for the price point, and the floor, even if the floor is low, which it could be given the offense he's in, I think the low floor at 9.5 isn't disastrous anyway, because when you look across all the positions for that matter, there isn't really massive value at 9.5 anyway. So I think the funds it does free up, it allows you to go really strong and stack your funds elsewhere, which you've clearly done throughout the rest of your team.
I think that even if he doesn't work out, say week 1, there might be, and if you're lucky with injuries as well, especially say week 1, there might be somebody else who becomes more apparent, more offers better value around that price point. So the other thing was the changes on this, because in my original lineup I had, instead of Conklin, I had Logan Thomas, but that meant that I couldn't have Calvin Ridley. I had to have, well, in this case I had Tre'Quan Smith. And actually, Tre'Quan Smith plus Logan Thomas, I'd rather have Ridley plus a punt tight end, personally, for many reasons. So, because I think Ridley is going to be a top 3 receiver this year. Last year he was still. This year they've lost to Julio Jones, but he was doing it without Julio Jones anyway because he was injured for half the season last year. Yeah. So I think Calvin Ridley is just top player, and he'll probably be in pretty much every one of my lineups. Cooper Kupp, I know you're a fan of his, obviously, as well, for both fantasy and non-fantasy and stuff. And his price at 16 million, I think, is really good value. And that price range is a bit of a funny price range as well in the receiver position. I think because there's actually some quite good value there, like T. Higgins and CeeDee Lamb, Julio Jones himself, Chris Godwin, players like that. So if for whatever reason I don't like Kupp, there's plenty of options at that same price point. I think that something to bear in mind with having 2 transfers a week is that's great, but I feel like most weeks you're going to be using at least one because of an injury. So if you can do a transfer you want to do by only transferring out 1 player rather than 2 to create salary, like we would do an FPL or something like that, then I think that's good, and that's why I kind of like playing the higher priced players. So, yeah.
I think that price point you mentioned, Mark, at 16, of the receivers you've mentioned there, I think you saw one of my lineups that I did earlier, and I had 2 of those guys at 16 because it is a bit of a raft of talent there. You mentioned some there: Kupp, Higgins, Lamb, Julio Jones, even Lockett. At 16, he's probably still going to get somewhere around 95 to 105 receptions over the season. There isn't, outside of DK Metcalf, there isn't much else there in Seattle to take that from him. He's super reliable in terms of he barely misses any time at all. I don't think he's missed many games throughout the last few seasons. So then you've got Chris Godwin. And then even if you drop in slightly below that, you've got some really high upside in Jamar Chase if he hits the ground running. You've got Brandon Ayuk. You've got Robbie Anderson there. Cortland Sutton at 15.5 could be one to keep an eye on if, as the off-season reports are saying, that he's really explosive and he's got that burst back. He's completely rejuvenated from his injuries. I hope that is the case, because he'll definitely be in my thoughts at 15.5 if that is the case. So I do like that price point. My only issue with that 16 million price point was I just could not decide who I actually wanted within my team. But I don't think there's a wrong one to have. Lamb and Kupp are probably the 2 that stand out for me. I think Lamb has the potential to be a top 10 receiver this season. Kupp maybe top 15. So yeah, it's a difficult price point, but I love that. I love those receivers, and talk me through Watkins. 7 mil
Well,
Watkins sneaking in there.
You got me onto Watkins. I don't know why I'm talking through it. And also, he's a popular guy with the 5-yard rush family, isn't he, as well? So
Yes,
he's
yes.
he's number 3 on the depth chart at the moment. In slot position. I know you have your own sort of doubts about this as well because we talked about it before. But he, as much as anything, he's a player who should be on the field quite a lot, and he's only 7 million, and therefore he allows you to pay up at other positions, I think.
Yeah.
And even if he doesn't work out for the first couple of weeks, I'm kind of thinking somebody else will become apparent because the prices aren't changing during the season. So if FanTeam have mispriced somebody badly, then you can take advantage of that all season. So that's what I think.
I think we spoke about this, Mark. There's some receivers around that 10 to 12 million bracket that have high upside, but the floor could be exactly what the floor is for Watkins, and Watkins is costing 3 to 5 million less. I think what I like is situationally, there's Devonta Smith first season, there's Jalen Reagor second season, first season very disappointing. Maybe wasn't what they thought. That remains to be seen. You've got Miles Sanders there. Outside of that, the only thing that concerns me with Watkins is that it's likely to be 2 tight end sets, I would imagine, in Philadelphia, because they've got Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz is still there. We know he's more than capable. So that would be my only concern. But like you said, at 7, he's one of the cheapest players actually on the contest that you can own. And he's had a really good preseason, so a little bit of this, and it won't come as a surprise, he's also in my lineup. A little bit of it for me is the hype from the off season as well.
I think he's also down as a kick returner or something on special teams at the moment. So you've always got that possibility of like an extra touchdown, maybe or 2 during the season.
I think he offers something a little bit different that you don't get from the other receivers there as well. You know, he's got good size. He's 6'2". But, you know, the Eagles players have been saying in the off season that, you know, people haven't really taken notice of Watkins yet, but they will. He's been training with Calvin Ridley, apparently, really, really working on his route running. So at 7 mil, it feels very, very low risk, and I like it because of it literally just allows you to spread those funds in so many places. I think if I wasn't on Watkins, I think I would probably be looking at, I think my cheapest receiver then would maybe be 11 or 12, and I'd probably be looking at someone like a Marquez Callaway. But even then, I still don't feel that confident in owning someone like that. I think I'd rather take the drop, go for Watkins, and then use the funds elsewhere to really bolster other positions. Yeah,
if you look, it's a good point you make, because actually, if you look through a lot of those players sort of between the 7 million and say the 14 million, a lot of them are still wide receiver 3s at best. At best, you have some sort of you have some players that could do something like Zacchaeus of the Falcons may well step up into kind of the role that Gage had last year. He's a possibility, and that's 11 million. But you've got to be like Deshaun Jackson. We've got to wait and see how he could actually end up being the best value if he stays fit all year, and with the new quarterback and the presumably more potent offense, he could end up being the bargain of the season, couldn't he, Deshaun Jackson? But there's not much to get excited about. So if you're putting somebody in almost like a placeholder, then you might as well spend as little money as possible. You can make a case for a lot of those 10, 11, 12 million pound players, but lots of it is, what ifs.
Yeah, it's guesswork, isn't it? It's projections at this stage. And another one really low down that has my eye is Cali Freeman at Detroit, who's listed as the wide receiver 2 on the depth chart. But again, I think the wide receiver situation in Detroit is so much up in the air outside of the apparent wide receiver 1 in Williams. I think it's the targets could go anywhere, and anyone could emerge as the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. I remember St. Brown could step up. So we don't know. And I think if you're going to go at a price, I think, you might as well just go as cheap as possible, like we have with Watkins. If you're going to really balance your receivers, then there's nothing wrong with picking a Marquez Callaway or someone like that. Jacoby Myers at 13.5 has the potential to put up some good numbers this year of what we saw last year. But I just think there's a lot of question marks, like you said, Mark, with that. Anything up to around 13-14 million, really, it's just question marks everywhere. It's littered with receivers that just haven't really done it just yet up to this point, or receivers on the sort of the downturn of the careers, if you will, rookie receivers who we don't know what role they're going to carve out in their offenses just yet. So yeah, Watkins, let's see what happens with Watkins. Move on to your quarterback then. So Kyler Murray, which
is not exactly a hot take, is it? Kyler Murray. So as we talked about this last week a little bit, the rushing quarterbacks are kind of like the old Konami cheat code. And, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, they're three of the top four. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes is up there as well. I think you can make a case for any of these quarterbacks at that price. I mean, I think the quarterback pricing is good because I think you're paying more for what should be the better fantasy quarterbacks. Kyler Murray had a great year last year and he was injured. He had shoulder injury, didn't he, for quite a while and stuff, and he still managed to score a lot of points. So he's going to score points through the air and on the ground, I think. And the great thing is, because he's 19.5 million, if I want to, I can get another top quarterback for any week I want, like Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott, if he gets back to full fitness. I think that Jalen Hurts, 18.5, would be I want to keep an eye on him and see if I can save a bit of money there if I'm getting a similar production, because he definitely has the talent. Whether or not he has the pieces around him the same way as Kyler Murray does, that's another question. So I know that there'll be people who are liking. I've seen a lot of lineups playing sort of those 17 million pound quarterbacks like Stafford, Burrow, Ryan, Mayfield, those sort of players. But for me, I want one of these top running quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think if you look at PPR scoring last year, I think Kyler Murray was third of all players, only behind Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers. When you actually look at the difference in what he's scoring versus someone like a Baker Mayfield, for example, there's like 120 points, 130 points in difference, which if Kyler Murray is going to be a bit of a set and forget kind of player for you, that's a big point swing. And I think at 19.5, for me, he's probably the best option that's of those top 5 priced quarterbacks, because of the fact that he does have that dual threat capability to his game. I think it's probably a better situation in Arizona as well for him this season. Well, I suppose that remains to be seen. But I know obviously AJ Green's there now. There might be little to no production that comes from AJ Green, health dependent, but when he is healthy, he's still a good receiver, still capable contributor. Rondale Moore's there now. Chase Edmonds looks like he's going to take up the share of the carries with James Conner, but we know that Kyler Murray's still going to scamper around like he does. So I think that the points will still be there for him. I do like a couple of the cheaper quarterbacks. I know you mentioned Jalen Hurts, Mark. I do think Matt Stafford's going to have a big season at 18. I was very, very close to having him in my lineup. You know that. If I was going super cheap, I'm still intrigued by Sam Darnold at 16.5. And if the San Francisco 49ers become Trey Lance's team at 16, I'd be a little bit tempted there at some point in the season as well, especially if he starts balling. Jameis Winston, we know Jameis Winston is a good fantasy quarterback because he throws a lot of touchdowns and he throws a lot of yards. He has also thrown a lot of interceptions in the past as well. but I think he's probably a better fantasy quarterback than a real life quarterback in that sense. And I think at 16, his price is worth a look as well. But yeah, I think early doors, like you said, you have someone like Carla Murray in at 19.5. It's a very easy pivot then to move to someone cheaper. I can't see myself going north of that and getting a Jackson, Mahomes, or Allen, but I can certainly see myself dropping Kyler Murray down a little bit if there is an emerging cheaper quarterback, where I do like the run of games, and then freeing up the funds to improve the lineup elsewhere. But great option. Love it.
Yeah. Yeah, and Colin Murray did that third place finish with an injury as well. Remember last year. So, fitness wise, if he stays fit, I think he's nailed on to be the highest fantasy scorer of the year. I really do.
Yeah,
really, he's that talented. But now anybody who's really eagle-eyed will notice I pretty much spent most of my money at running back though, and this is you don't have to be an expert to understand that Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara are good players, and they're good plays. What I would say is, like we talked about with the Kyler Murray and Calvin Reid a little bit, is if I want to change things up because I've got all that money in one or two players, it makes it easy to move it up, change it up. So if for 1 week, for whatever reason, I wanted Tyreek Hill, say, be quite easy to do that because I've got the funds for it. Because I just temporarily drop McCaffrey. I think McCaffrey, not Kamara, and then I've got Tyreek Hill. Yeah, I can do Kamara as well at the same price as Devontae Adams is the only one as well. So it gives you lots of options there. I think I've got at the moment Joe Mixon in as my third running back. Initially, when we did our first look at our first teams, I had Austin Eckler there at the same price, but I don't really like his chances on week 1 because he's going to go up against the Washington defense, who I think are going to be very good this year. They were very good last year, but they've actually improved, and they got a lot of players come back from injury. So actually, that third running back, again, if my transfers aren't being used up by injuries, I think that's one I'm going to end up changing because, I saw some Antonio Gibson videos on my Twitter timeline today, and I was like, well, I've got to play him now instead. But we'd already agreed that these were the lineups and stuff. But at that price, you can have like Joe Mixon, Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor, Antonio Gibson. I'm not sure anybody else I'm particularly interested in. And even someone like Jonathan Taylor, we've got to see what happens with his workload. I think he's possibly more of a, traditional DFS play than he is for this. But yeah, so that third running back, I think, could be one where I end up changing them quite a bit.
Yeah, I love that lineup, Mark. It's the strength of your team for me is in those running backs. With it being PPR as well, I think scorers like McCaffrey and Kamara, they're going to be right up there because you've got the extra points. They do contribute out the backfield for both the teams heavily. It's you look at the teams they're on, and the offense is built around those players, which is rare. You don't tend to get many offenses built around a running back because you have such a high turnover at the position. But McCaffrey is that good. Kamara is that good. And I like the flexibility it gives you as well. Like you said, it's an easy pivot again to, because of the flexibility in roster construction, transferring out McCaffrey and transferring in Tyreek Hill, though it's over 2 different positions, that is just one transfer that you burn in there for that. So yeah,
I think that also gives you on the say McCaffrey's bye week. I can then just switch to one of the high price receivers. I don't have to replace him with a running back who isn't going to be as good.
Yeah. I think what I like with it as well is because there is that health question mark over McCaffrey, who's had his niggles over the last 2 seasons. I think if he doesn't hit the ground running, or if he does pick up a little knock, it's easier to move off someone that's the highest price that you're going to get at any position at 20 million, and it's easy to move to a different position than if you wanted to, and it potentially then opens up a cheaper running back coming in as his backup as well. So, there's always that to consider, and you're freeing up funds there elsewhere as well. This is where this game is going to be really, really flexible, really adaptable as things happen, as the season unfolds, basically.
I think the trick will not to be rigid about it, because, for example, if you've got 4 wide receivers and you've got a bye week for, say, a really expensive one, you don't have to replace him with a wide receiver. You can replace him with a tight end or a running back. And I think it's the same. I can't, if I've got to take McCaffrey out for a week, it doesn't make any sense to sort of save money and have somebody who's not as good as a DeAndre Hopkins or a Devontae Adams or a Tyreek Hill. It just makes sense to go for another premium player. Or maybe that's the week where you put Travis Kelce in. And I do end up with the 2 tight ends for that week only and stuff. So I think we had a brief discussion about this before we went on air, but I think that's the beauty of the sort of stars and scrubs lineups on here. I've seen a lot of lineups where they're all the players around 16, 17 million. I just don't think they give you the same flexibility when things go wrong, like injuries happen and stuff. So I think all my lineups are going to be stars and scrubs the way it stands at the moment because of that. On here, my DST is like a £9 million DST. It's Houston in this case. It's just because their first game is against Jacksonville, who've got a rookie starting quarterback. Now I know he's a very good rookie starting quarterback, but even Peyton Manning was bad in his first year. So that's the defensive position is so variable. You really can't predict it. You can tell over a season that, say, New England should be pretty good and stuff. And I've already mentioned the Washington defense, but I don't ever. I said this so many times last year as well, I think, too, Nick. I don't ever want to lose out on a skill position player because I've spent the money at defense.
No, absolutely not. And this is an area where if I was applying any sort of tactic from how I play normal fantasy football to how I play this, it's that your defense should be absolutely the last thing that you pick in a draft. Unless it's a league that is geared towards scoring with defense, or there's some kind of special scoring there, or it's IDP. Your defense should be your absolute last pick of the draft, or second to last pick if you've got a kicker in there as well. I'm treating this exactly the same. It's a nothing position to me. I have gone with a slightly more expensive defense, and I've gone with a 9.5, which you'll see shortly. But I think it's one of those, Mike, where you've got the transfers there, and I don't envisage over the course of a season I'm going to be burning transfers on defenses. But there's such a variance out of defenses in terms of scoring. I just would not get hung up in putting your budget into that. If you're going to spend on a defense, cap it at 10 million, absolute max. It shouldn't be any more than that.
That completely. And I was trying to think this afternoon of reasons you would spend money on your defense, and possibly the idea that if you were lucky with injuries, you wouldn't need to use up all your transfers. So would you then start streaming your defenses and stuff? But you can't guarantee that's going to continue. That you're going to be lucky and stuff, and then suddenly you get stuck with the defense who's playing the top 6 out of the top 10 offenses for the next sort of run of games. Yeah. So, I mean, if you're new to this, I really wouldn't put too much thought into the defense. Years and years of historical stats show you that it's such a random position in fantasy. And to be honest with you, I prefer if we didn't have to pick a defense at all. So, but then again, I'd rather we didn't have to pick a tight end either. But there you go.
You show some love to the tight ends, Matt, because I certainly am when I'm gonna show you my team now. So without further ado, my team week 1. So we start with Darren Waller. I know you're not on the Darren Waller train, Matt, but I just can't really get away from him at 16.5. Targeted as much as Travis Kelce was last season. Most receptions for a tight end. An upward trend in his touchdowns as well, which is what was lacking from the season before. He had pretty much the same kind of production, but just without the touchdowns in the season before. Last season, he managed to notch up 9. So At 16.5, I think he is a great price. If you were to say to me that someone who finished the season with only 30, around 30 points less than Kelsey, 25, 30 points less than Kelsey, is going to be priced 2.5 million less than him in this game, I would have told you you're crazy. That is definitely not going to happen. One of the reasons why I like Darren Waller is not much has changed really in Las Vegas in terms of the receivers there. We've got Henry Ruggs season 2, Brian Edwards season 2, third, and Renfro in the slot. And then outside of that, we've got Zay Jones, Willie Snead. It's quite clear to me that yet again, Darren Waller is going to be consensus wide receiver 1 in Las Vegas. There's not really much else for Derek Carr to aim at. I know they've brought Kenyon Drake in. Josh Jacobs, up to this point in his career, has shown us he's not really a receiving running back, so there's no concern for me in terms of targets going elsewhere there either. I think 16.5, I think he will make a mockery of that price over the season. So that's where I'm going with tight end. I know you don't necessarily agree, Mark, with the high price at the tight end, but I think, I did toy with putting Kelsey in my team earlier, and I just didn't like it as much as I did with Waller in, because I feel like you're getting a wide receiver 1 with Travis Kelsey. We know that he scores practically as well as a wide receiver 1 does, but not quite as well. So for that similar kind of price, you're looking at a Devontae Adams, a Tyreek Hill, a Stephon Diggs, who all scored more than him last season. So the fact that you're getting someone like Darren Waller at 16.5 and producing the kind of numbers that we got from Justin Jefferson in his record-breaking rookie season last year, absolutely welcome to my team.
I'll let you into a little secret. My very first lineup had Waller in it as the tight end. The thing is, this isn't a stat I haven't researched before we come on here, and I hope you know it, know if it's true or not, but I have a feeling that didn't Waller score get a sixth of his yards or something in that one game against the Jets or something like that? Like a fifth or a sixth of his receptions. He had sort of a monster game with like 15 or 18 receptions or something, and a load of yards and stuff. And that's fine, but he's not like a Derek Henry or a Tyreek Hill who has those sort of outlier games more than once a season, I don't think. So if you do the sort of the old statistical thing of taking away the top and the bottom performances out of his season, I just don't think he's worth the money. But your arguments are pretty compelling because in Vegas there isn't much else. There really isn't much else. So yeah, and he was in my original team, but for me, the money, I just prefer to use money elsewhere. As we've mentioned a lot already, I personally prefer the money elsewhere. If it's not Kelsey, it's no one for me.
Yeah, fair enough. And I know that is your thoughts on it as well. Evidently, with Conklin being in your team. But yeah, I hope I'm right on it, Mark, and I hope you're wrong.
It wouldn't be the first time.
We will see. The receivers, I think we've covered Watkins off more than enough, so he's in my lineup for the exact same reasons that he's in yours, Mark. And I think the other 2 receivers that are on there, they need little to no introduction whatsoever. DeAndre Hopkins, probably the safest pair of hands in the NFL most consistently, season on season. Stephon Diggs had the most receptions out of any receiver last year. Again, I think he's in a similar kind of situation whereby there's not really much that's changed in Buffalo. He's still going to be wide receiver 1 there. There might be some further emergence from Gabriel Davis potentially. I know they've brought Emmanuel Sanders in. I still think that the lion's share of the targets are going to go to Stephon Diggs. DeAndre Hopkins, as I said, his production speaks for itself. I still think that there's 2 receivers there that come the end of the season. Certainly Hopkins will be top 5. Diggs, I think, certainly has the capability of being a top 5 receiver again this season, whether Sanders impacts that or not, whether Cole Beasley impacts it if he gets his act together and as long as he's on the field with all his COVID thoughts and views and things like that. But I think Diggs still has, he's certainly got top 10. I think that's a given. I think he is going to be a top 10 wide receiver, potentially pushing the top 5. And I think you can get both of those at 18.5 and 18. If I'm going with 3 wide receivers, I want 2 big hitters. Certainly to cushion Watkins as well, who's at a 7. I know I showed you a lineup earlier where I did have a construction of 4 wide receivers, 2 of which were Lamb and Cup. The other one I think maybe was Keenan Allen, maybe DeAndre Hopkins, but I love the look of those 2 in the team. I love those 2 big hitting receivers. So there's not really much more justification I can give than that. They do speak for themselves, really.
Yeah, you don't need to. I mean, the Buffalo offense should be so exciting again this year. I'd love to be able to get Josh Allen in the lineup that I really liked. I just feel like just even that $500,000 makes such a difference. I think. But yeah, I mean, Josh Allen's got better every year, hasn't he? Every season, and Stephon Diggs has benefited from that last year. I think Hopkins and Diggs are going to be top 5, to be perfectly honest. I don't think out of these sort of high-priced receivers, I don't think anybody's going to particularly. I'm not sure who's going to sort of break through into those. If you the top 4 of Adams, Hill, Diggs, and Hopkins, you've got people like Ridley and Jefferson underneath who've got a chance. But I think those top 4 are priced there quite correctly. And again, I chose Ridley as my 18 million as opposed to Hopkins. The only reason I did that was because I wanted to deliberately not stack. We talked a little bit about stacking last week on the pod. I sort of made a conscious effort not to stack there because obviously you reduce your variance if you don't stack, and also it means you have less things to be concerned about on that bye week for the team which is stacked.
Yeah,
as you will have with the Cards. But yeah, the Cards are one of the fastest paced offenses last year. I think that's going to continue. And, I think Chase Edmonds is going to be another good option for them at some point, possibly for some weeks if you're looking for a fill-in.
Yeah. Hopkins, I mean, you look at his opening 3 games, he's got the Titans, Vikings, Jags, and then he plays the Rams. I mean, he could be out by week 4 for me there. The Rams kept him fairly quiet last season compared to his standards anyway. But that is the impact of Jalen Ramsey. So he may be gone by week 4 for me, but again, it's at 18. It gives me that pivot point. I think there's some compelling cases to be made slightly lower than that with Jefferson at 17.5, AJ Brown at 17.5, Allen Robinson. If there's better quarterback play in Chicago, Allen Robinson is a great price at 17. Keenan Allen's another price, I think, at 17. You know what you're getting with these kind of receivers. You're getting massive target share. You're getting a lot of receptions, and they're the kind of receivers. Allen Robinson is no stranger to the end zone. Likewise with Keenan Allen. DK Metcalf you can even throw in there as well. So it's an easy pivot for me if I do want to downgrade slightly and free up a little bit of budget to go a little bit bigger elsewhere, maybe at running back, even dropping down as low as the 16s where we've already touched on some of the really good receivers that are priced down there like Cup and Lamb. But yeah, I think with Hopkins and Diggs, like I said, having those 2 bona fide wide receiver ones, top 5 receivers at that in the league, there's just massive potential, massive scoring potential there. I shouldn't be disappointed in my receivers week on week, put it that way.
And this is the difference between our lineups, isn't it? Because you've got such a dependable receiving core there, which I definitely don't have to quite the same degree. But then equally, when we get to your running backs, we'll see we've taken very different approaches to that. So
yeah, and I think I would class Darren Waller as a receiver almost. He's a wide receiver 1 for me as well. How I look at my lineup, Mark, to me, I have 3 wide receiver 1s. And that's simply because of the workload he gets as well. So, yeah, if it stays that way going forward, we shall see. But I certainly like it off the bat. There's a little orange mark around Diggs' name there, but as far as what I've read, he should be good to go for week 1. So fingers crossed on that. If he isn't for whatever reason, obviously between now and the game going live, if I hear anything on that, he will be out of my team. But as far as I'm aware, he is good to go for week 1 from all the reports I've read. He's returned to practice. So
I think he was a player who was always on the list last year, quite a lot on the injury list, and he always played. So top players always do. This is something for people who don't know much about this or haven't played NFL before. What you tend to find is even the top players, even if they're the questionable tag, tend to play. Yeah. It's more the sort of fringe players who are on the questionable tag who don't end up suiting up.
Yeah. Carla Murray, we've spoke plenty about Carla Murray. I've got him in for exactly the same reasons you have, Mark. Like I said, I did look at Stafford, and I think that's a great price. And there's some reasonably priced quarterbacks slightly lower than that, but I am going for the certainty in Murray, and given his price point, again, easy to move off if I wanted to, easy to cover with another quarterback on a bye week. Running backs, so we had McCaffrey the same, Mark. We mentioned on the last pod, with McCaffrey, what you get in there if we were drafting in a fantasy league and it was PPR 1 quarterback, Christian McCaffrey is the first name off the board in almost every draft.
Yeah.
That might have changed slightly following his injury, but as long as he comes back at, even 95, 90% health, that shouldn't be the case. McCaffrey was an easy decision, I think, there. The only downside is obviously his price. He's priced at 20, which is the highest price in the game. There's only 3 players priced at that, which is you've got Allen at Buffalo, you've got Mahomes at Kansas. So he's priced with the guys that are scoring the highest, but I think he warrants that price. One thing I have got my eye on is how Saquon Berkeley looks upon his return, because we were talking earlier offline that you had a consensus pick 1 and pick 2 there really in PPR drafts or redraft fantasy leagues. And if Saquon Berkeley comes back anything like the player that he was, what we've seen, what he's capable of, 18 is a really, really good price. I really like that. But there's just that question mark over the health, I suppose. He's coming back from, I think, 2 big injuries now, and I don't like that in a position that it's such a physically demanding position, running back, and it feels like a transfer waiting to happen. But I hope I'm wrong, and he comes back and he's superb, like we know he is.
You'd if you put in Barkley and Stafford, you'd end up with $4.5 million extra to spend. But this is where the construction is so important. I just don't see how you're going to improve your team massively with that $4.5 million.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just something to bear in mind. But yeah, Barkley was last year. I mean, I saw plenty of drafts where he went before McCaffrey. It was either who you're going to pick and stuff, and obviously he got injured in straight. I think was it week 1 he got injured in.
I think week 1 or week 2 maybe. It was very early on.
Yeah, but he was definitely a number 1 pick at that point for most people. So a lot of people, sorry, not most, a lot. So yeah, he could, if he comes back to full health, then that's great. It's just one to monitor, I think, for the season, like you say.
Definitely.
Might be one to get in around after his bye week or something like that, and then he sort of he hits the ground running, as it were, because he's back to 100%. Just one to bear in mind.
I'm going cheap with my next 2, or cheap certainly for the position anyway. So the chance reared its head when Etienne went down for the season to get a 14 million RB1 into my team with James Robinson, and I'm certainly not passing up that chance. You know, we know what James Robinson did last year, the surprise of last season, as an undrafted free agent, and only 14 games started and still finished running back number 7 in PPR scoring. You know, if he plays all 16 games there, he's probably running back 5. I don't think he's probably running back 4, as a matter of fact. I think he would probably have overtaken David Montgomery's output, maybe not Derrick Henry, but I think he'd have certainly surpassed Jonathan Taylor, Aaron Jones, and David Montgomery. At 14 mil, my only concern is it's a new offense, it's a new quarterback. That said, if Trevor Lawrence has his struggles early on, they might lean on Robinson a little bit more than people might think. And I think what some people forget about James Robinson as well is he is a capable pass catcher, and people think that maybe that's why Etienne was drafted and brought in. But, you know, James Robinson still finished the season with 49 receptions, 344 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns out of the backfield as well. And when you compare that with some of the players around him, receiving running backs, you know, he was ahead of Ezekiel Elliott, he was ahead of Kareem Hunt, he was ahead of the likes of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jonathan Taylor. He was ahead of him. You know, he was just behind Giovanni Bernard. So there's still opportunity there for me. There's nothing really behind him now in Jacksonville that I think threatens his share of carries. So at 14, I think it's a great price. If it doesn't work out, I'm not too disappointed, because at the end of the day, it's 14 million, and we've already discussed that there's not much at 14 million throughout any other position that I think would give me the potential output that a James Robinson can, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I think that McCaffrey and Robinson are going to be the most popular combination of running backs, or possibly, actually, maybe the most popular combination of players in the whole contest, I think. Like you say, Robinson allows you to get an RB1 and save a lot of money. I suspect there's going to be other running backs that become apparent during the season of a similar price who will be able to do well. Another thing we've discussed previously is, and you know, again, this is for people who, if they don't necessarily follow the NFL as much as we do, if a running back gets injured, often his replacement can score as well as the original running back, or certainly gets as much opportunity. That doesn't happen so often with wide receivers or tight ends. I think, you know, there's this sort of James Robinson story doesn't really happen that much with wide receivers.
Yeah.
So I think that, and as you know, we've already seen a case of this happening already with your other running back. You know, sort of opportunity is everything at that position, and touches are as well. Yeah.
And that brings me on nicely to my last running back, which is the Gus Bus, Gus Edwards. We were talking about prior to the pod, and I think, like you said, opportunity is everything. And even with limited opportunity thus far in his career, he's been nestled behind Mark Ingram, J.K. Dobbins to a lesser extent last season. Obviously they've got Lamar Jackson there in Baltimore, who is practically a running back for them. It's like having 2 running backs in the backfield. But even with limited opportunity, he has still managed 700 yards minimum in his last 3 every season he's been in the NFL, basically his last 3 seasons, and he averages 5 yards per carry per season minimum. Last season, one of the things that was quite telling was he was getting goal line touches as well. So he actually had an upward trend in his touchdowns last season. Prior to last season, he'd only had 4 in 2018 and 2019. Last season, he had 6. So for me, again, opportunity there. 12 mil. He's priced reasonably well, I think, there at 12 as a backup, really, but he's now coming into a starting role. Nothing else behind him on the depth chart. Justice Hill, we know, is injured. J.K. Dobbins is injured. I think Tyson Williams is maybe worth keeping an eye on at 6 mil as well. Certainly if Gus Edwards is held back by injury, or if Tyson Williams starts sharing the carries a little bit there, though there's not as many carries as there are on other teams because of Lamar Jackson running the ball as well. $6 million could be an intriguing price, certainly as an enabler if he's going to get even 5 to 10 touches. That would definitely be worth considering at $6 million. It's similar kind of position, I suppose, we're in with Quez Watkins, but I think with Edwards, even if they were to bring in a veteran back at this stage, I still don't think it harms him that much. And I think again, the ceiling that you get from a 12 million running back who has already shown on limited opportunity that he can put up good yardage as an average, he can score with goal line touches. It's hard to find a receiver at 12 million, for example, that's going to give me the same potential output that I'm going to get from a Gus Edwards. We could be talking, there was some weeks last season where he's scoring 10, 12, 17, 14, and that's behind other players in the depth chart at the time. The fact that he's now primary running back in that depth chart and still priced at 12 million, I'm probably not going to be getting 10, 12, 14, 16 points per week out of receivers that are priced at 12 million. So for me, is this a bit of a gamble? Of course, I suppose, because of his situation. Lamar Jackson's there. We don't know how much of his carries are going to be split between him and Williams. We don't know if they'll bring in a veteran back. But I think his ceiling at 12 million mark is too good for me to turn away from. And prior to maybe about 2 hours before we came on this pod this evening, he hadn't even really come into my thoughts much. Obviously, I knew he was there. I knew what he was priced at. But, I think the news of Justice Hill being injured has just reinforced it for me as well, that there just really isn't much in the backfield at the moment for Baltimore. No. And even at 12, if I do choose to move off him, the time when I do choose to do so, there may have been an emergence at wide receiver at that point, around that sort of 10 to 12 million bracket. So I still think it's an easy pivot to someone else if I wanted to go down that route.
Yeah, it definitely felt like last season, as it went on, the coaches started trusting Edwards more, I think. And he was he's been a popular pick anyway. Even before Dobbins got injured, he was for example, in best ball, I was picking him up in pretty much all my best balls, I think. I didn't do that because I thought Dobbins was going to get injured in preseason. I did it because he had a role still to play, and I still think he does. I think around a similar price as players like Naheem Hines as well, who's like $500,000 more, which you could afford with a smaller, cheaper defense. So that's the sort of, that'll give you the options if it turns out Edwards' role isn't as much as we're expecting. But he does look and appear like it's going to be great value at that price. The only, well, not the only, but I suppose the main concern you have is it's been a while since Baltimore have had sort of a lead back, a workhorse or anything like that. And also, like you say, Lamar Jackson steals a lot of touchdowns from the running backs, etc. So, but I think it's a great price, and it enables you to have your sort of 3 wide receiver ones as well.
Yeah, and another player I've got my eye on is Sony Michelle at 10. So if it turns out that Darrell Henderson so far in his young career has struggled to stay on the field for any length of time or any run of games, and I can't imagine that the Rams have brought Sony Michelle in to sip Gatorade on the sideline, I do think he will be involved in the touches in the backfield there. Certainly with a share, I think we will go down a similar route to what a team like San Francisco's employed in recent seasons, where it's been a committee of backs there. So at 10 million, I think there's upside there with Sony Michelle as well if he hits the ground running. So
yeah, but he's injury prone as well, though, isn't he?
He is, yeah. But I think in more so, Mark, just to illustrate that there are ways to pivot off Edwards if this experiment of mine doesn't work. But fingers crossed it does. That's what I'm hanging my hat on. So yeah, other than that, we've got a Minnesota Vikings defense, and we've already touched on defenses, Mark. We don't like spending money there. I think the only reason why I chose the Minnesota Vikings defense was because they don't have too bad of a run of games to start the season, I don't think. So they've got the Bengals, the Cards, the Seahawks, the Browns, the Lions, the Panthers. That's not a bad little start. I've no doubt they'll pick up some wins there on the road and at home. So there's not really much to the defense. I looked at the 9.5s. The Bears were there as well, but I'll go with the Vikings because I think the Vikings will be pushing around those playoff places again. So
I've seen a lot of people cleverer than me saying on Twitter that the Vikings defenses should be greatly improved this year. So,
well, fingers crossed on that.
There you go. Top analysis about defenses. There you go.
And that rounds us off. That is our game week 1 team reveals. We will be posting these on the socials as well, Mark, I'm sure, before Thursday, along with our links. If you do want to join the fun at FanTeam, you can go to fanteam.com, but we will have some personalized links on Twitter as well, and we will pop some in the description. I believe this is also going to go out as a podcast. I hope I'm right there, and I've not just dropped us in it, but dropped Murph in it for the workload. But you can catch us on all major podcasts as well. We will be doing this weekly, Mark, won't we? So we will be back week on week. You'll see the progression within our teams. You'll see what changes we're making throughout the season, and we'll be talking through it week on week on how we're doing and what changes we do make and why. Obviously, we're not going to have a team reveal quite like this every single week, but moving forward, we'll be reviewing what's gone well the week before for us, and then what we're maybe looking to change or what we've got our eye on moving forward. So there's going to be plenty to discuss over the course of the season, but we will be back with you at a similar time again next week. Fingers crossed. We're both up there on the leaderboard, Mark, or certainly I am. I'm not too bothered about what you do, in all honesty, mate.
Hopefully next week we'll be live, so if people have any questions they can hop onto the YouTube stream and just fire them at us and stuff. So that's the plan anyway, isn't it? So we shall see. But I think I don't know about you, but I'm even more excited about the season starting now. It's like in 2 days from when we're recording this. So I just want to create some more lineups now. Yeah,
cannot wait. Don't forget, lock your lineups in before the game on Thursday night. If you do want to interact or any questions that you do have for the show, you can get me on Twitter at Nick of Wigan. Listeners or viewers to this show will see our names on there, but anyone that's listening back on the podcast, at Nick of Wigan. And where can the listeners find yourself, Mark?
At _SMRF.
I think one thing we do actually need to put out there, Mark, is, and people, again, who listen to our show will know that we always tell people to gamble responsibly. This is your money that you are spending. This is essentially still a form of gambling, what you are doing. So make sure that you do only spend what you can afford to lose and gamble responsibly. I think we need to get it out there to the listeners, Mark. How should we really be signing off this show? Because we've always signed it off with draft responsibly, and that just does not feel relevant anymore. So I think we need to get it out there.
We lost our pod always ends in tears gag as well, because we're not covering DraftKings tiers anymore. So we kind of need a gag ending, really, don't we?
We do. We'll put that out there and see what the suggestions come back as. Maybe your suggestion will be featuring this time next week. But we will. Yeah, absolutely. We will hopefully see you all again same time next week. Best of luck in week 1.